Look around today and man, the world just feels totally unpredictable, right? I mean, unexpected turns of events, shifting economies, constant external pressure. It's enough to leave anyone feeling anxious, frustrated, or just completely out of control. But what if I told you there was a timeless, battle-tested framework built specifically to make you pretty much undefeatable in the face of all that chaos? Well, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack how an ancient philosophy isn't just dusty history, it's actually the ultimate toolkit for finding peace and purpose in our seriously wild modern world.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. I want you to put yourself directly in the shoes of a guy named Zeno. Picture this. The year is 300 BC. You're a massively successful, incredibly wealthy trader living in Cyprus. You are on this major voyage, hauling your most valuable cargo from Phoenicia to Piraeus. And then, bam! A massive storm hits. Your boat sinks. The cargo, gone. Through the sheer, unpredictable force of nature, something totally out of your control, you go from being incredibly rich to absolutely broke in a single instant. So, how do you react? Anger? Devastation? Do you feel like life just completely cheated you? Look, for almost anyone, those are the totally normal reactions, but not for Zeno.
Instead of just weeping over his drowned goods, Zeno had an incredibly unconventional reaction. He actively chose to maintain his composure. He just remained calm and neutral. You see, he realized that while he obviously couldn't control the weather or the ocean, he had absolute control over how the disaster affected him mentally. And this single, profound shift in mindset, it didn't just save Zeno's sanity, it actually cascaded into the creation of an entirely new way to view the world. It literally birthed the philosophy of Stoicism.
Which brings us to Section 1, redefining the true Stoic. Because, if we're actually going to use this toolkit today, we've got to completely challenge our preconceived notions of what that word even means.
See, today, we've kind of built up this modern myth. We inadvertently view a Stoic as someone who's basically emotionless, right? Like someone who bottles up their feelings, never lingers in emotional extremes, and just acts like a total brick wall. But honestly, the historical reality is completely different. The original philosophy wasn't about suppressing your emotions at all. It was actually a highly functional system for processing negative emotions from bad experiences and actively turning them into a really unique, logical perspective on the world. So, it's not about feeling nothing. It's about not letting what you feel dictate your actions. And because these early Stoics gathered and taught right out in public spaces, this wasn't some elite secret club hidden behind palace walls. It was actually the ultimate equalizer. I mean, you have Epictetus, whose name literally translates to acquired because he was once a slave. You've got Seneca, a super famous statesman. Marcus Aurelius, a literal Roman emperor, and one of the most powerful guys to ever walk the earth. And, which is pretty incredible for the time period, you have women. While society back then largely barred women from philosophy, Stoic teachers, like Musonius Rufus, fiercely disagreed. They argued that women possess the exact same natural inclination toward virtue as men.
So, these early Stoics actively avoided segregation and thought against inequality. In fact, and a lot of people don't know this, they actually invented the word cosmopolitan. When we hear that word today, we immediately picture, diverse, bustling modern cities like London, Toronto, or New York. But thousands of years ago, the Stoics coined this exact term, meaning citizen of the world, to preach this really radical concept of global unity and togetherness, completely regardless of your background or your social status.
And that spirit of radical clarity brings us right to Section 2, the dichotomy of control, which, frankly, is the core principle of this entire philosophy.
This quote from Epictetus brilliantly illustrates the core concept here. He stated, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals, not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control." That right there, that is the dividing line. Our absolute chief task is separating our internal choices from external forces.
Let's map this out using a super relatable modern analogy, creating content for YouTube. So here is what you actually control: coming up with the idea, writing the script, editing the video, putting in the sweat equity, and finally, clicking upload. That is entirely in your hands. But here's what you don't control: the YouTube algorithm, the view count, or your subscriber numbers. So the crucial point here is this: if you attach your happiness and your self-worth to those external forces, you are setting yourself up for a massive disappointment. Why? Because those forces can always fail. A true Stoic judges their success purely on the effort they put in, completely independent of the actual outcome. But to really master this dichotomy, Stoics use an exercise called voluntary discomfort. We are talking about sleeping on the hard kitchen floor, taking freezing cold showers, or, eating nothing but plain potatoes for a few days. Sounds super fun, right? So why on earth would you ever do this? Well, in a world full of constant advertisements telling us we desperately need the next best thing just to be happy, these uncomfortable exercises act like a giant reset button. They indirectly prepare your mind for future misfortune by basically proving to yourself that, hey, even if things get incredibly hard, you are still going to survive. It massively increases your baseline feelings of gratitude for all those little things you normally just take for granted.
So, once you actually understand what you can control, you're going to need a compass for how to act. And that leads us to Section 3, 4 Core Virtues, a Stoic's Compass.
These 4 pillars are pretty much the foundation of a good life. First up, wisdom, which is the ability to separate the internal from the external. Second, courage, which really boils down to just 2 actions: persist and resist. Third, temperance. That's the practice of moderation, doing more with less, and realizing that the true limit of wealth should simply be having what's essential. And fourth, justice. Now, above all the others, justice is considered the absolute most important virtue here. It dictates that no one should do harm to another because we were literally all born for each other to do good to one another. And that virtue of wisdom? It's perfectly anchored by this incredibly powerful observation from Viktor Frankl. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space, right there, is exactly where your freedom lives. Life is going to throw a stimulus at you, whether that's a literal shipwreck or just an unpredictable algorithm. But the response? That is entirely yours to shape." Which builds perfectly into Section 4, rewiring your mind, modern applications. I want to shift our focus now to the extreme, real-world application of these ancient tools and how they actively translate to modern science today. 27. That is the number of years Nelson Mandela spent in prison fighting against apartheid. I mean, just think about the anger, the intense desire for vengeance you might feel after 27 years of completely unjust captivity. But throughout his time in that cell, Mandela actually read the works of Marcus Aurelius, and when he was finally released and elected president of South Africa, the whole world basically expected him to brutally punish his captors. But instead, utilizing that exact Stoic space between stimulus and response, he chose to urge his people to relax and rebuild. He realized the past was totally beyond his control, and he applied Stoicism to build a better nation rather than tear it apart. So this philosophy isn't just some inspiring piece of history, it's highly effective modern science. Ancient Stoicism is actually the direct foundation for 2 major modern medical therapies. First, you have rational emotive behavioral therapy, or REBT, which helps patients challenge their negative emotional thoughts with strict logic, replacing unfounded beliefs with productive ones. And then there's logotherapy, which is built on the exact Stoic principle that humans are fundamentally driven by finding purpose. It teaches that even in the darkest of situations, we can still fill our lives with meaning if we identify that purpose. To fix our problems with happiness, we literally have to rewire the way we think. Look, Stoicism is a process. It's all about redirecting your definition of value to the things you actually control and consciously stepping away from the chaotic storm of everything else. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought. What external forces are you currently letting control your happiness? Are you tying your self-worth to the weather, the algorithm, or maybe the opinions of others? Take a moment today, step into that space between stimulus and response, and start using this toolkit to take your power back.